Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lightning Talk Session B, Maker Literacies, Technologies, and Design. My name is Leanne Ney, and I'm the moderator for this session. So we have 4 presentations as part of this session. Each Lightning Talk is going to be about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a 10-minute Q&A towards the end. So as we go, feel free to use the chat box. You can add conversation there and ask questions, and then at the end, we will have time to ask questions of the presenters. So we're going to start things off. We've got 2 recorded talks, and then we have 2 live presentations. So first up, our first presentation is titled Rebooting Digital Literacy, Transforming a Palo Alto City Library Computer Lab, presented by Chris Markman. So Chris recorded his talk ahead of time, so we're going to go ahead and play it now.
Hey everyone, I'm really hoping the audio works this time. This is the 3rd time recording it. Who would have thought that pre-recorded was more difficult than a live webinar? I don't know. Anyway, hey, I'm Chris Markman. I'm the Library Services Manager over here at Palo Alto City Library. I'm going to talk to you today about a project that we started at Mitchell Park Library, which sort of orient you into our sort of local library setup. We're a system with 5 branches. And just in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley in general, there's a lot of libraries around us. So what I'm going to talk about today might not apply to you directly, but I think there's some lessons learned here that you can use for your own makerspace redesigns and just designs in general. So let's keep the momentum going. I'm going to jump in over here and tell you about a little more details to some historical context. We'll say, does your library have a room with a special name that no one knows why it's called that? We do. It's called the Ventura Technology Learning Center. Now, no one actually calls it that, but it is the plaque on the wall. This was something that came about in around 2010 because of various reasons. There were some delays with constructions and things, but we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary in the space. It was a very successful launch. The library, the relaunch of Mitchell Park Library. The computer lab on the 2nd floor, though, the thing I'm going to talk about today, that was kind of underutilized for many years. And, during the pandemic closures, we saw an opportunity to kind of rethink how we're using the space. That's where the list of goals came from this slide. I'm going to tell you now about the, some of the other benefits of this redesign. It was like, we also wanted to try out some new library service models, like, sort of on-demand booking of things, the sort of DIY setup with the Bookings app in my Microsoft 365. If you're not familiar with that, that's kind of like a Calendarly type setup where people can sort of like self-check themselves in. This was another area where we didn't ever really had like a formal space for like e-help things. Staff were always kind of like jumping into meeting rooms that were empty or trying to find like a empty bench or couch cushion area, seating area around here. It was nice to finally have a space dedicated to that. We could jump in anytime we wanted and use just for the one-to-one meetings. And then finally, this was another area where we're really hoping to launch more volunteer opportunities. And I'm laughing at the slide because I think volunteer oasis kind of implies something else, but it is funny to think about, right, if you consider that. Anyway, in 30 seconds or less, here is the redesign. Here is the essence of what we did, this group of like 6 or 7 of us at the library. One of the key things here is that we wanted a space that was modular, that was easy to move things around. Everything's on wheels. We could have different setups depending on what was happening. But then it also had storage built into that space too. So it could be packed away or locked up, depending on how many people were going to be there, or was it a staff-led event or sort of a community-led event. We had all that in mind when we started. The redesign was essentially taking, 5 rows of a public computer bank where things were kind of locked down and you're kind of stuck with that classroom setup. And we kept all the tables and the chairs, but we added a bunch of grant-funded equipment that we acquired over the last 5, 6, 7 years or so. And then it finally had a home. It finally had a place where it didn't take just as much time to set up the VR gear as it did to run an hour-long program with that same gear. So the efficiency gained was more enormous, but it was also another area where we could really highlight some of the nice things that our library offered that people maybe didn't know that we had. Okay, enough said about that. Here's what the lab looks like now. I'm just kidding. This is a AI generated image here. I think I used Reboot Room as the prompt for that one. Uh, Copyright to Dolly for this, not me. Okay, the soft launch that started in the summer of 2022. We had some early programs here, on the left side. I'm happy to say we also have a YouTube channel where we have documented a lot of stuff, almost everything that happened in that space since then. So that includes some Twitch TV streams, some AI events, some other, the Robo Dojo series that won a couple awards. There's just a lot happening in there, so I won't spend too much time here. But you can go to our YouTube channel and just search, at Reboot Room. It's there. You'll see my face a lot because I used to stream more, but I don't as much anymore. Anyway, yeah, we did the soft launch, and then as it turns out, there were some things that we didn't anticipate. So the top question was, couldn't people borrow our equipment? And at that time, they couldn't, and they still can't right now. But we're moving towards that setup. There's a lot of more interest in gaming than we anticipated initially. But then there are also some other programs that we hadn't really considered, like podcasting, videography, photography classes, and then of course the Vintage Media Lab itself is it was popular and it's popular now. It's still backlogged several months out, even though we've added more days to our weekly schedule. But that was sort of like an early indication that like had the right idea and that we should continue with the rest of the launch and the redesign. Another surprise. Maybe this is just about the time that we did our soft launch, but there were way more parents and small children who stopped by this lab than we could have ever anticipated. This was originally it still is a sort of teen, adults, and seniors type of space for that type of programming. But I think just by the nature of having some video game gear out and a giant TV, people saw us playing games like Dreams or other ones on the PlayStation. They wanted to know what was happening in that room. That's actually where this image comes from. You'll see it as a poster later on, but because of our our limited hours and our sort of limited staffing at the time, there was a lot of downtime. There's a lot of downtime in there in a sort of dark room, so we had a QR code and a website set up so people knew what to expect. Okay, then the hard launch happened. September. This was our massive advertising push. I think we got something in the newspaper. We had something on our front page. We had social media, all these things happening at the same time. We were able to successfully use the bookings app, although we have refined that over time. Different models that you can use for that same setup there. What else we had? The Robo Dojo, the FarmBot tours, the Streamers Academy. That's one that I led at that time too. It's sort of an interesting in-person version, then an online version. Then it came up with a hybrid setup using Beanstack. That's one of our reading club apps that we have. We also added a reference collection in there, and that kind of moves towards the the long-term goals that I'll talk about later. But this is a space that we're hoping to have more sort of creativity is involved in here. There we go. Here's that slide I was just telling you about. So in the meantime, since our launch in 2022, we have had a new partnership that started with San Jose State University. That's the local library school, the iSchool that's right nearby us. We've expanded some programs that were more popular than others. We've ended some, we've added some new ones. We're still looking towards that open lab goal. And the ability for people, sort of register and just like have free access to the room. We've not quite added equipment checkouts, but that is planned, and I think that's something that might allow us to expand this idea to other libraries also, just having duplicates of the same equipment and same training material, all those things. And then another sort of surprise is that this room has had a lot of traffic from things like after-school coding clubs or high school clubs that wanted a space to meet that wasn't, it was easier to get to, or maybe just like had more hours and different times of the weekday. We're inviting those people back now. It's sort of become an ongoing thing here. Okay, finally, last slide. In case I haven't mentioned it already, this has been a major success here. We've had almost 300 programs. I did the math today since the soft launch in 2022. We're a little under like 1,200 attendees total that have been in the space. I think it's actually more. I have some new programs I want to share. Maybe this will give you some ideas. So having a space for local large language model research. I think that's something that libraries should consider. Taking things out of the cloud and sort of more in person or like in front of you so you can understand them. Just see that it is another type of computer. It's not some magical thing that's out there. Um, of course, our vintage media lab being very popular, we're thinking about expanding that with sort of add-on programs like image restoration, video restoration, other things that you can use a computer to sort of take those digital assets and then take them to the next level. We've had some success with our own streams. We want to add some volunteer streams in the future. I mentioned podcasts before. We've actually done some podcasts, not for the public, but for staff to get the word out and sort of talk about different, things we're testing out or issues that have come up. Also, just like book clubs and things like that. It's been another new area that we're exploring. And I already mentioned the student clubs and the hackathons. Let me end this. I see I'm right at the time now. Please, if you have any questions or want to learn more about our setup or the research we did, my email is at the front of the slide deck. I'm also on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me. Thank you for your time. I will say goodbye once I find the stop button.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. All right, we're going to keep it moving. So our next recorded presentation is titled, What Does It Look Like to Design Makerspaces with Equity in Mind? And sharing results from photo-based surveys of library makerspaces from Celeste Moreno.
Hi everybody, thanks for your interest in this session. My name is Celeste, and today I'm going to highlight some results from photo-based surveys of library makerspaces that I hope to speak to what it looks like to design library makerspaces with an orientation toward equity. First, I want to recognize that this presentation is adapted from materials that were prepared by Ashley and myself. Ashley is not here with me today, but they are the program administrator of the Idea Labs, which are a series of library makerspaces in the Denver Public Library System in Colorado. And I am a full-time creative technologist in the makerspaces at Boulder Public Library. I'm also wrapping up a PhD at CU Boulder, where I work in a research group called Creative Communities. Some quick context for the research part. This research emerges from a national NSF-funded collaborative project called Facilitating Computational Tinkering. The photo survey that I'm sharing today was conducted with our research partners at the Idea Lab Library Makerspaces and with a couple of local Clubhouse network partners, but I'm focusing on the library makerspaces for this presentation. Continuing with our setting of the stage, I also want to briefly talk about the word equity since I use it a lot in this presentation. In this context, I'm referring to the idea that one-size solutions do not fit all, especially in these community-engaged contexts where the needs and identities of community members can be really diverse. Different people and communities need different supports to grow and thrive. There is a lot to say here, but I'm keeping it short. Some big ideas related to equity that we've reflected on as a group are that equity is an ongoing practice that you work on all of the time. It's not a checklist, it's not something that you achieve at some point, it is ongoing. And also that equity is everywhere, from the designs of our environments to how we communicate. And finally, that making time to stop and reflect is critical. One method that we tried out to support educators and the DPL makerspaces in making sense of what equity means to them is a photo survey. Why did we do a photo survey? I want to start with why photos. Makerspaces are these really sensory-rich places. There's a lot to see. There are example projects and machines and people collaborating, interesting materials, and that can be really hard to describe with just words, especially if you're not familiar with makerspaces. We also thought that a photo survey could be a more accessible way to engage Idea Lab staff in research, because sometimes talking about big ideas like equity through conversation alone can feel really challenging or even vulnerable, so soliciting photos was a great anchor point that could spark conversations and reflections that are rooted in the everyday realities of staff. Also, photos are something that can be shared both internally within the Idea Labs as a reflection tool and externally to help other people see and understand Makerspace staff's equity work. This is the process that we went through. We created a list of photo survey questions. We collected photos and reflections from Idea Lab staff. The CU Boulder team organized the data and found themes. The CU Boulder team and Idea Lab staff met for a share bag, which you can see in this picture here, and we discussed and reflected on the results. And this then turned into a research paper, which I'll share more about in a bit. And it's really important to note here that this is an iterative process, not a prescriptive process. So you don't need to follow these steps or have an outside team if you'd like to try this process yourself. Here's the list of the photo prompts that we used for this survey. Some folks texted us photos, some emailed us photos, and other we visited and we interviewed them and took photos alongside them. We spent quite a bit of time really intentionally crafting these questions, and I'm happy to chat more about this later if anybody's interested to hear some of the rationale. I'm going to share just a couple examples of responses to the photo survey. So the photo you see on this slide shows the front wall of the Hadley Makerspace, and there are some plastic containers that hold several flyers advertising the Makerspace. It's one of the first things you see as you walk into the library and the Makerspace, and this photo was an example of an educator's response to the prompt, take a photo of something that welcomes a specific community to your space. So I want you to just take a second, look at this image, and ask yourself what communities might be welcomed by what you see here. The educator who took these photos noted that this welcomes the diverse communities that the library branch serves. So they have large immigrant populations in the area they serve who speak languages like Spanish and Vietnamese. And critically, they note that the flyers are labeled in the language itself rather than in English to help decenter English as the dominant language in the space and to make it clear that other languages are valued here. This photo was an example of an educator's response to the prompt, take a photo of something that makes your space more accessible to a specific community, group, or person. So take a moment to take the photo in. This photo shows a container of headphones and a poster that says, too noisy? Ask a staff member for noise dampening headphones or grab a pair from the bin. And the educator who showed this noted that this is a useful feature for neurodiverse folks who may have sensory sensitivities and a need for lower auditory stimulus, and also that it's good for just anyone who needs a quieter environment that day. There are so many interesting examples that emerged from this photo survey and from looking at these photos together as a collection. To give you a quick taste of some of the themes that emerged as we looked at these photos together, I'm going to next share some of the findings that we shared in the research paper associated with this project. We found that what these photos showed in the Idea Lab Makerspaces is that educators curated their spaces and designed their spaces so that they supported diverse interests, so that they supported diverse needs, and supported diverse community and cultural identities, and finally, so that they celebrated their communities of learners. I invite you to dig deeper into these findings, themes, and photos through the research paper that we wrote. It's open access, so it should be free to you to access, and I will provide a link to it in the resources for this talk. It's also in a unique format that makes space for more visuals than a typical research might allow, so I hope that makes it a little bit more accessible and engaging. I want to wrap up with some reflections. A reflection that Ashley shared is that building out explicit time for reflection is important. It can be really easy to just go in a busy community space, but you have to stop and reflect from time to time. One reflection that I wanted to highlight is that there are limitations of this research method. Photos are just one point in time. Things change in these spaces so fast. And there are things like relationships or other social and community dynamics that are maybe not captured as well through just photos. And also, focusing on photos and visual data has its own accessibility limitations, as it really does prioritize sight and the ability to view images. And on the topic of interactive resources based on research that get at equity in library makerspaces, I want to briefly plug this resource. Our research team has created a zine called What Does Equity Mean to You? And this was created to help educators like library makerspace staff to make their equity work more visible, to unpack it, and to identify places where they have room to grow and expand their practices as educators. And there's also an accompanying facilitation guide to support you in engaging in this scene. Resources for everything that I've talked about and more are linked here in the slides that you'll have access to. And with that, thank you. If you have any questions or want to get in touch, you can reach me via email at celeste.moreno@colorado.edu, or you can reach out to me via the Library Makers Network.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Celeste, and thank you, Ashley, as well. Okay, so moving on to our third presentation, we have our next presentation is live, and it is with Morgan Chivers. It's titled Maker Literacies. Morgan, you can take it away. Sorry, Morgan. We'll get you sorted. Just a minute.
I think I'm unmuted, but can't share our video still. Here I'm sharing.
All right, I could see your slides.
Okay, well that's more important than my face. So I'll just start going, and if you get the video worked out, then that's a bonus.
Thank you.
Hi folks, my name is Morgan Chivers. I'm the Maker Literacies librarian at UT Arlington. And the Maker Literacies is a research initiative that we've been doing for coming on 9 years now, which is, as the subtitle says, it's transferable skills based on student learning outcomes, rooted in the type of learning that happens in makerspaces. So, as we all know, like we work with really exciting stuff, and it's really common and understandable for us to focus on the coolness of those things. I'm really excited about the tenor of the conversations that we had in the keynotes and the two prior presentations in this session that we are thinking much more holistically than being equipment, cool tech focused. But this is still a strong theme within Makerspace community. And in a lot of the users that we see coming in is like, wow, like lasers, how cool is that? Or 3D printers, God's gift to changing the world, and it can make anything you can think of. And computer numeric controls are so great. You can integrate it with more traditional technologies like embroidery. And in this specific example, you can even tinker and hack to turn a regular sewing machine into CNC embroidery with some simple robotics programming. Um, and especially in our context, a lot of us as well are in a educational environment. And students make really cool things, like this map of the autonomous regions of Spain, laser cut out and turned into a puzzle, or this 5-color woodblock laser engraved t-shirt print that was done, a self-portrait using a cameo cutter to layer up. I think this is 8 different layers of paper to express a vibrant personality, or typography projects and that deal with multimedia as and using 3D printing or other digital fabrication methods in other projects as not an end in of themselves, but as a way to make components that are then used in video or other multimedia work. But why do we do all this? Right? We're about the students, and the students come first, and specifically the students learning. And in the higher education context, in the university where my career is, we're focused a lot on student learning outcomes. So Maker Literacies is a way to get out of the loop of being focused on the tech or even being focused on the specific things that the students are making and really look at the student learning outcomes and how those are important to the classes that the students are taking and the ways that we can integrate the technology that we have in the Fab Lab or in our makerspaces with those SLOs. So here's some example student learning outcomes, and what I want us to recognize is that none of these are in maker intrinsic disciplines. So it is I don't want to say the word easy. It is uh, a more direct line to go for classes where it's a studio arts class or an architecture class or an engineering class, something that is maker intrinsic, where that discipline for, decades or centuries has had their students get hands-on education and even if not formally defined as experiential learning, the students are putting their theories to test and getting real world feedback and having to iterate their way through learning how to do the core competencies of that discipline. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens on the campus community within language classes, within uh, history, within the entire College of Liberal Arts, within mathematics, within education, and philosophy, nursing, biomedical. So all of these different projects or all of these different student learning outcomes that are already nested into the curriculum that the faculty are used to running can be adapted so that we are able to integrate the makerspace in a meaningful way, not in a gimmicky way, not in a let's just use a tech because it's cool way, but in a way that really anchors in those student learning outcomes and is able to advance them. And so we have developed a long and detailed list of the types of transferable skills that people are building competencies in when they engage in making. And so we tried to approach this list in a very holistic way that really describes a lot of different facets about the types of things that people are going to be learning, whether they're conscious of it or not, and as a way of naming the type of learning that is happening and providing examples through rubrics of what expert level finesse within that competency area looks like and what moderate or developing might look like to give students a path towards leveling themselves up. And so as you can see from looking through this, all of this is technology agnostic. We're not talking about learning, how to slice an STL and make G code or how to translate pixel-based graphics into vector-based graphics. All of those things are necessary in order to actually do whatever project, but we looked at a higher level on these things to try and make it be um, that type of lifelong learning skill that then also makes it easier to think about how we can think flexibly and and associate these or map these to those student learning outcomes. Um, and also just to say, we've done a lot of writing and publishing on this, and I will share um, I think right after the presentation because I don't know how to get to the chat while I'm in it. I'll share the link to our publications page, and also to the in the resources sheet for this presentation is the link to where you can see the entire set of all of these. One of the things I want to stress in this presentation is a more recent adaptation we've done in the vein of like everything is iterative. that we realized that when we were having consultations with faculty to think about how we might apply some of these maker literacies to their courses, um, that it was kind of overwhelming to look through. And so we developed this idea of frameworks where we've grouped. So within the inquiry framework are these four of the maker literacies, each of which has several sub bullets. And then, foundational practice is essentially about like the actual act of making itself, or managed, which is really what we found a lot more interest in mapping and assessing these uh, in developing time management and teamwork components. And with these of the knowledge management and of really getting students to think in a meta way, right, about their own learning, not just learning the thing that they're learning for the class content, and not just also learning the stuff they need to in order to make effectively, but also learning to learn how they're learning so that they then become more empowered and are able to learn faster, better, deeper in their future endeavors. So to help facilitate adoption of this in other institutions, and this can be higher education, K-12, this could be done for workshops that are outside of formal education, if you're wanting to focus on assessing the type of learning that is happening. We have this repository of curriculum on our webpage. And so you can see there are dozens of different examples from a wide variety of different disciplines. There are maker intrinsic disciplines represented within these. It's not like we don't do those, but I just find that those oftentimes get less attention, and so it's nice to highlight those and to really encourage the adoption through those, because the type of engagement you get with students is really profound and encouraging. So you can filter it by what competency you might be interested to see what curriculum other people have already developed, or by discipline, or by what institution it was developed at. And if you are using this methodology in your courses, highly encourage you to submit the course information that you've done as a participating faculty, and we can highlight you and your work and essentially give you a Creative Commons open way to publish the curriculum that you've done and help accelerate and highlight other people adopting that and building community that way. Also, what really helps for faculty are these rubrics. I'm working on a tool to make it so that it's not such a wall of text that hits people in the face and is a lot to read through, because it is overwhelming and unnecessary to try to assess the entirety of a listed literacy. So almost nobody is going to say, for instance, assess all of number 8, employing effective knowledge practices. You'd pick one, for instance, using version control to highlight within the way you're actually teaching to and what you're assessing the students on, and then providing them with that rubric so that they're able to see what they're expected to do, and then have those reflective components where they're assessing themselves along the way, not just at the end, not just summative assessment, but formative assessment is built into the process so that students are able to understand where they are falling short while they still have time to build those competencies and improve. And here are the places where I've pulled those images from, and the link to our website. And thanks for y'all's attention. And I look forward to seeing what curriculum y'all are doing, and seeing what else y'all are talking about in your talks. Thanks.
So thank you, Morgan. So our final presentation for this session is titled Re-emerging Technologies in Academic Libraries from Yitzy Palo.
Howdy, y'all. So if anybody was at Actal this past year, I apologize. This is essentially the same thing, just like 3 times faster that I did there. So my name is Yitzy. I am the unit head for emerging technologies and experiential learning at Boise State University. I'm better known for its physical space, the Maker Lab, on the first floor of the library. Got about 14 years of media makerspace library experience. Um, Climbed the library ladder from student worker to staff and to tenure track librarian. And I recently authored a chapter in Elsevier's Encyclopedia of Libraries, Librarianship, and Information Science. So I'm going to talk about vintage tech. I asked AI, like we all tend to do nowadays, to make an image of vintage technology to kind of help define it. But it's super subjective. It's very generational, so it depends on the age of the person that you're talking to. But it can kind of be boiled down to technology that's no longer ubiquitous. And so these are technologies that have kind of fallen by the wayside. Subjectively, 20 years older or later tends to be the kind of like industry standard for what you would consider vintage technology. Um, so emerging technologies can be defined through a few very buzzy words that I'm sure we're all sort of aware of as people that work in these kind of spaces that tend to house emerging technologies. But they tend to have a sense of radical novelty to them. So they're new, they're novel. They have fast growth, so they tend to iterate and change very quickly. There's a sense of coherence to them, so there's a logic to why they exist in the now. They tend to be pretty impactful. So what kind of impact can they make on your day to day? But there is some level of uncertainty and ambiguity. So what is this? How does it work? Where is it going? I've found that through integrating some vintage technologies in my makerspace that these pieces of tech can exhibit many of the same characteristics. So I've kind of dubbed it re-emerging technologies. So they tend to have the same novelty. What is this old thing? They less about the growth, but there is a logic to them. There is impact to them as well. And again, there's that ambiguity or uncertainty. Why is this here? What is this doing? Why are we using it? So I have two cases that I'd like to share that are in my maker lab, my maker space right now. One is vintage pen plotters. So this we kind of um, inherited through sort of a dig into a pen plotter that we had beforehand to the vintage, and then two Chandler and Price letterpresses that came to us from the graphic design department here. Because they had too many and they needed to surplus them. And we felt very poorly that they were going to get melted down. So first, the pen plotter. These historically were precursors to the color printer. So if a Fortune 500 company like this person in this beautiful photo needed to do a pie chart and they needed it in color, they would use a pen plotter. They were made by a few companies like Hewlett Packard, Roland, Houston Instruments. But then they fell by the wayside. The inkjet was invented shortly thereafter, and these ended up in closets, which were then found by weirdos like me. And went, can we interface with these? And so, yes, it was figured out that we could. And there was also a small subset of people that remembered these things and we're still creating them. And so they do still exist to this day as modern technologies. So to my right, we have the AxiDraw, which is actually now the next draw. They were purchased by Bantam Tools, a relatively popular CNC router company. They were built in this century. They're known as iBots. There's a lot of knockoffs that are out there that you can buy as well. They just, move a robot arm on an XY axis and lift up a pen using a servo motor, which is essentially the same thing that the vintage plotters do. And so to the left is an HP 7475A creating a piece of art, multi-layered grayscale art. And it is moving a paper more on a what you would see in a Cricut, like a vinyl cutter method, and lifting that pen up with a solenoid. So slightly different. We discovered these vintage plotters through going onto AxiDraw's support Discord. So they had a Discord server that was there to help with support. And one of the owners talked about how they had a vintage plotter, and they pointed to another Discord that had its own sub-channel about vintage plotters. And so a student of mine and me kind of got down in a rabbit hole about it, which resulted in me personally now with 12 vintage pen plotters in my garage, and a somewhat annoyed spouse when they keep showing up. With these pieces of technologies, the first step is, making it work, because they typically aren't being used in a way where it's easy to just kind of jump right in. So for the vintage pen plotters, it came to how do we connect it to a modern day computer? And it depends on what the connection style was. So serial connection tends to be the most popular for these types of plotters. And there is a very established way on doing it. So much so that it is pinned in that vintage pen plotter uh, sub channel. And when people ask about how to interface it, there is someone that will go read the pin message. Don't try to do anything different. Just read the pin message, please, please, please. Parallel is another style of interfacing that's relatively easy, but it has its own difficulties. And then there is a final one that HP like to use when in a lab setting called GPIB. And we call that hard mode because it is extremely hard to interface with. The right-hand picture is actually a Arduino, a Raspberry Pi hat that goes on top of your Raspberry Pi in order to interface with GPIB plotters, that was made by a single person that cared about this enough to make a interface for these older, harder plotters to connect with. So it'll essentially connect to it, and then it will feed it the information it needs to the way that GPIB needs it fed, which is a little different. Then you have to find pens. These plotters hold pens in a very specific way. So you either have to find what we call new old stock. So basically go onto eBay and find, people that are still selling these pens and pray that they haven't dried out. Or there is a group of people that have created adapters for these plotters that you can then 3D print. Then you need to actually make, have it draw. The best way to do that is through translating scalable vector graphics, so SVGs, because SVGs are essentially just lines. And we're just drawing on a glorified XY, coordinate graph. And so what you can do is you can take your lines and translate it into directional data that it can then utilize. This can be done multiple different ways, but again, one singular person created a wonderful command line interface to take scalable vector graphic files and turn them into HPGL optimized for plotting. And so that was VPipe. And so you can see this is a very tight-knit community that cares. And then you start drawing it. So you draw these vector graphics, and you can also actually do some bitmap conversions as well through yet another piece of software that was created by a singular person who cares quite a bit about these pieces of technologies. So why have them in your makerspace? Partly because there is a really interesting holistic, or what I call synergistic, flow that can happen in makerspaces with these pieces of technologies. So for pen plotters, you have this immediate, you can 3D print a fix to it. But there's also some very interesting code-based things that you can utilize it for teaching. So generative art is really, really cool, but it's even cooler when you can actually have it be drawn afterwards. So it's a really great way to teach folks processing, JavaScript, other types of code-based software, and give them a physical item at the end of it. There's also a wonderful little piece of software called Plotty Bird that allows you to create a playable version of Flappy Bird that is being drawn in situ. And it has become one of the best ways for us to table or just show off our space to people when we have to do fests and things like that. And then again, there are ways to convert bitmaps to line art, and that's another really great teaching tool. The second piece of equipment that we have in our space that we've been utilizing that is a very vintage piece of technology is our two Chandler and Price letterpresses. One of them is from 1880, the other one is from 1910. And we were given nothing with them outside of chases, rollers, and the plot to put the ink on. So while we were given these wonderful behemoths, we did not really know what to do with them because we did not get the full kit. So that led us down a rabbit hole of making it work. And so typically you have something called keys or coins that allows you to lock into a chase using furniture, which is basically wood that it fills in the blank space of your type. But we had none of that. And so we chose to press fit. So we have pieces of machinery that have pretty good dimensional accuracy to them. And so we can 3D print something that would fit a chase that we measured with a caliper. I was doing this personally, and I had a student go, "This is taking too much time. Is there another way that we could do this?" And so we figured a way to actually laser cut and then using a dowel system kind of hold it all together in order to do this faster because they were getting impatient with sitting there waiting for the 3D printed thing to finish 3D printing. The next is kind of like, what do you do in order to show that this works? These were made to churn out hundreds of items at a time. And so if you are going to ink this, you want to churn out hundreds of things because the cleanup for it is pretty messy. So we settled on carbon paper. And so we would put carbon paper down and we would make our pressings and we would see if we got our height correct or anything like that in order to kind of like do very quick one-offs. We have inked it once and that's where we kind of learned that and you use oil-based ink because if you use water-based, you run the risk of rusting basically everything on it. And we learned two things. One, it's very hard to get, you have to use a lot of solvents to get oil ink off. And also, if it falls on the floor and it gets on someone's shoe, they will track it forever. And so if you are on carpet like we are, you need to be very, very careful. Again, there's some really interesting flows within a space like ours with these pieces of technology. So you can 3D print your type, you can laser cut your type, you can CNC route, you can get really, precision milling into it with lathes and so on. There is some publication on this, and I am actually running a grant-funded project with a local career technical education class in the Boise area to have them go to our space in our engineering's makerspace to interrogate this problem, to try and create type in multiple different methods and research whether one works better than the other and kind of the cost benefit analysis of that. And so I'm really excited to start that up in April. So great in a space, great for people to play around with, but how do you kind of make this a little bit deeper? And so it's actually relatively easy to get vintage technology into curriculum if you're teaching classes. So art's a really easy one to kind of fit in with these kind of artistic devices. The humanities has been a really wonderful place for us with these. One of my biggest champions is a professor in writing who desperately wants to create a space for the book as art, which very colloquially can be known as a book lab. And so we've been working very hard together. He teaches a class on book as art, and they come into our space and try to utilize our technology to make editions of any type of work, but do it in an extremely creative way. History department ended up becoming a really great champion for us as well because they teach the history of the 90s, which makes me cringe, and it hurts a little bit that we are teaching the history of the 90s at this point. But this is where this animated GIF comes from. We took one of I have a laptop from the 90s running a program from the 90s connected to a plotter from the 90s, and I was able to show them how this would have operated in the 90s. We also played Doom, which was fun as well. Uh, and also there's, computer science and engineering. I've had conversations with the engineering folks about, are there ways to create pen adapters that are a little bit more robust than 3D printing? And I've talked with computer science folks about going the next step with that kind of like plotty bird. Like, how else can we interface with these vintage technologies that draw in creative ways? And so it's giving some of these folks that are in a traditionally STEM environment that STEAM part of it, a little bit of creativity, which is really kind of exciting for me. There are a couple lessons that we've learned from doing this. One is, don't work in a vacuum. It's very easy for administration to not understand what you're doing, bringing these pieces of technologies into your spaces. So it's very helpful to find people that you can that can be your champions when you do this. Also find your collaborators. One of my best collaborators is another librarian within Albertson's library who works in special collections and university archives, but they run the Idaho Center for the Book, which is the center for the book within Idaho that then selects a book, two books every year, and takes it to the National Book Festival. And part of their charge is the book as art. Find support. So the internet is a wonderful place full of wonderful people that care about these things. And so it's very useful to find support, find help in these spaces. Discord has become this really great community for these things. And faculty as well. Again, that English Lit professor has been incredible and has actually found grant opportunities for us to purchase other printing presses that are being made to this day. One that's very popular called the Book Beetle that will allow us to do kind of multi-offs without having to use the Chandler and Price printing presses, which can be pretty cumbersome to use. And then generate engagement. And so we started a fan art exhibit within the library, and we encouraged students and faculty and staff that submitted to this fan art exhibit to use our technology. And we had someone use the vintage pen plotter to create Miss Piggy and Kermit in a kind of saint-ish way, which was really kind of great. These things can take some time to work with, so it's important to find time, which can be extremely hard, which is where the I'm not doing it right, but I'm doing it ethos can kind of come into play really well. Because they're vintage and there's not a lot of people that are telling you you're doing it wrong, you can do it wrong and still do it. And so press fitting is not the correct way of using a letterpress like that. Carbon paper, or even messing a little bit around with water-based paint, is not the way to use these pieces of technology, but they're getting use when they wouldn't, which is extremely important. So looking into the future of how to utilize these technologies, or where else we can go, I've had a lot of students express interest in analog film. A lot of them have purchased point and shoot cameras or SLR cameras, but they have to go to the one place that will actually process film in our city. And that is a huge money suck for them. And they're kind of beholden to them. And so as someone who dabbled in analog photography.
I'm
Yep.
sorry, I have to interrupt you just because we're over time.
Okay, I'll
I don't
finish up.
just say like one final thought.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the final thoughts with this is there's some really interesting synergy on this. It can enhance experiential learning. It creates a new level of access for your space. It can attract people. It can attract a older generation of folks. And there's a really interesting sustainability approach to this. Instead of allowing these things to end up in landfills, we can find places for them in our spaces.
Thank you, Yitzy, and thanks
Yep.
to all of our presenters for their wonderful presentations. I wish we had a little more time to keep talking, but I saw a lot of great conversation in the chat. So thanks to everybody who participated. And just a reminder, please check out the project website after today. You'll be able to access all of the presentations and get presenter contact info and so on. So thank you all so much. We have a little break and we'll see you all for Lightning Talk sessions C and D. Thanks, everybody.